Greetings, Hacksters! Welcome to this week's Hackster Café. Our guest is Stacey Higginbotham. I'm so excited and so nervous that I'm just like tripping over everything. Stacey Higginbotham, who is a 20-year technology journalist who's doing all kinds of cool stuff around privacy, cybersecurity, smart homes, IoT, tech policy. I could go on, but it's time for you to go on. I would love for you to tell us just a little bit about what your journey has been. I know that you started out as in school for journalism and business, and if you could just give us a quick overview of like how you got into doing what you're doing today.
Oh, wow. Okay. So way back in the day when I was like applying to college, I wanted to actually be a genetic engineer. Like this was pre-CRISPR. This was like in the 90s, y'all. And I didn't do a lot of research because I'm a pretty ad hoc person, and I chose my college. And then they were like, "Oh, you can't be a genetic engineer unless you study chemical engineering." And I was like, "Ooh, no way. No, that's too much." So I really randomly decided I like to read. I like to read magazines. So I decided to be a magazine journalist, which again, super random, but it worked out. So I ended up doing like concert reviews in college, and that was super fun. And then I decided, after like doing some reporting like on typical like newspaper reporting beats, I was like, ooh, these are terrible for my time, like just the way I want to spend my time. And so I went to business journalism because I wanted to like stick it to the man and like really be super righteous. I was really an annoying kid, I'll be honest. And I ended up doing that. I was a business journalist for like a year, and I covered the bond markets in New York. And then technology kind of was happening. This was in 2000. And so I went and started working at the Austin Business Journal covering hardware. And I freaking loved it because I am a great big nerd, and like semiconductor manufacturing, going to the fabs and seeing how that was made was awesome. I got to tour all these great places. Like at the time in Austin, IBM, AT&T, they all had like smart homes. I mean, again, y'all, it was 2001, 2002. And then I basically just stuck with it and worked for a business publication called The Deal. Then I went to GigaOM. And I actually got that job because Ohm came to Austin, and he was like giving a presentation, and I read his site. I freaking loved his stuff. And I basically quizzed him on how he was going to make money as a blogger back in 2007. I was like, this doesn't seem like venture sustainable. And he was like, it totally is. I will explain it to you. And then he offered me a job, and I took it. And then that exploded. Sadly, I went to Fortune. That was fun. But I really loved covering the IoT, and people were not excited about it. So I was like, I'm just going to start my own thing. So I started my own podcast and blog. It was called Stacy on IoT. It did really well. I mean, it was a niche publication, but like I made a business of it, and I worked with like my good friend Kevin Toffel. And I did that until I got bored with the IoT, and we can talk about that. And now I work as a consultant for Consumer Reports because I still kind of want to stick it to the man. I'll be honest.
Yeah. So I think that so you've mentioned. Yeah. I'm just getting past the beginning nerves here and trying to figure out where to dive in. So, okay, so first off, your handle is Giga Stacy. I'm gonna guess, does that come from working on GigaOM, or is this a separate thing?
No, so okay, Om Malik was the founder of GigaOM back in 2006. No, I don't remember when he started it, but apparently he got his name, the GigaOM brand name, from his mom, who Ohm had covered broadband for a long time, and he was dealing with like megabytes and gigabytes and whatever. And his mom made a joke, I guess she had anyway, ended up calling him GigaOM, and he took the name from that. And then Ohm forced me to get a Twitter account because I'm a super introvert. And he was like, you must have a Twitter account. And so I chose Giga Stacy. And actually, some of my colleagues, there's like a Giga Barb who was one of my colleagues because I think she also was like, I don't need a Twitter account. And yeah. And
Well,
it stuck. I mean, when Giga exploded, everyone was like, what are you going to do about your Twitter account? I was like, people know me as that. That's kind of how I started everything. So I think it stands on its own. And I don't mind honoring Ohm.
legit. So you mentioned sort of getting a bit disenchanted with IoT, and you've spoken about how it takes a lot to maintain, and it sort of moves under you constantly. Would you like to speak a bit about the transition that you've been going through?
Yeah. So the pandemic was really super hard for me. It's really hard to operate your own business with like, I had Kevin as a contractor and then an editor as a contractor, but it was like just me all the time.
Mm,
And it was just hard. And I realized that coming out of it, I was writing a lot of the same stories. And a lot of the stories were basically like, hey, it's like 10 years that I've been doing this, and it's still really hard for the average consumer
mm,
to maintain a smart home and keep it operational over time without investing a lot of time and money. And then two, a lot of these technologies were being minimally used, like on their best day, they were just used to like grab data about people and build further products for these companies and then create these subscription revenue streams for people. It
mm,
felt like the customer was not really being paid attention to. And then at worst, they were like surveillance devices. In some cases, they were actively used, like the Ring doorbells for police officers.
mm,
Um, and then, or just kind of passive surveillance devices with like that weren't very secure. So I just felt bad telling people that they should buy all of this stuff when 10 years in, it really wasn't meeting the needs that I thought it would meet. Like when I started. When I started, I had this idea that if you could use the IoT to harness data, you could make the invisible visible in a way that could really
mm,
make the world better. And I'm super naive.
mm,
But I thought like you would have like pollution monitors that would be like able to tell you, oh, between 3 and 4, when parents come to a school to pick up their kids, the pollution rises. And you could show parents that, and they would be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be idling in the like the pickup line,
mm,
right? Like, I thought cities could use that kind of data to find polluters based on like the amount of things that the amount of harm they were doing. I really
mhm,
thought, I mean, even in your home, like being able to detect like leaks in your toilet, which is a pretty common thing that happens, you could waste less water. But that's not how we were using it. We were using it to like detect information that was either, in some cases, not silly, but like seeing that someone is stealing your package. It's not like the police use that data in many jurisdictions to actually
mm,
arrest a package thief. It's not like you can watch someone do something, but you can't always do anything about it, right?
mm.
So it didn't feel like it was meeting the needs that it could.
It's interesting because a lot of these things are kind of voluntary, like opt-in kind of things where, it's like you could monitor your own packages and you could have parents individually have these like car pollution monitors. Whereas one thing that I've come to see through talking with lots of people about this is that, of course, a lot of these changes need to be happening at the like higher level and the systemic level. And it feels like that's what you're sort of transitioning into with these three different things that we're going to talk about today in terms of, for example, right to repair and uh, knowing what kinds of security measures are going into your IoT devices. So I'm really excited to talk about that.
Yeah, I feel like in America, we really value the individual, which don't get me wrong, that's great. But we really put a lot of responsibility also on the individual to like solve these problems themselves, but these are not problems that are solvable by an individual. Like it's not enough to say, "Oh, you can just opt out of having a smart TV," not when like a huge percentage of televisions today are sold as smart TVs, right? Like
Mm.
it's just yeah.
Yeah. especially when it's not necessarily always clear, like, what is a TV and what is smart, like, those boundaries are so kind of blurred. But I would love to jump into the first one of the links that you sent me about, like, recent projects that you're working on, because I think this one is fascinating. We've had Kyle Wiens on the show before, as collaborator on this, I think, and, getting your view as a policy expert, coming to this, filing comments in support of the FTC right to repair. This is awesome, and I would love to encourage everyone to go into the links to this video in the description and go check out this report, because it's basically recommendations. I'll let you describe it, maybe.
Oh, sure. Well, first off, I would like, if right to repair is your jam, and it should be just about everybody's jam,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we all have devices, and your audience especially has a lot of the abilities. Like, I mean, I've taken an Arduino class, but I don't know if I would be ready to repair too many of my things or deal with like pulling out a microcontroller in my dishwasher. But some of your audience probably would. And increasingly, they would have more and more problems doing that and actually fixing the problem. So the original comment that iFixit and US Perg filed back in November, comments asking the FTC to make rules to protect the right to repair. And then it was like January 2nd. So we all came back from the holidays and we're like, la, 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 yawn. And then the FTC was like, boom, tell us about it. And we're like, oh my gosh, we've got a month. Let's write this. Yeah, the
This is the November one.
53-page petition. Yeah, that thing is great. It will make your
Nice.
blood boil. They document exactly what's happening, and then they offer some really good solutions. So they offered the idea of a repair index, which is something that's happening in France right
Mm.
now, or was actually put into law in France.
Hmm.
And it's like a score that goes on a physical device that talks about how easy it is to repair. So putting that on when you buy a product makes it easier for the consumer to be like, do I want to buy this or this? This is more repairable. We can talk about the problems with that later. Repairs, or France's repair score, but it's a good idea. Two, they were like, hey, make a rule like just protecting this. And three, will you put in some sort of minimum support or a expiration date on some of these
Mm.
devices? So one of the issues with repairability or devices going under is that you don't get software updates after a certain point of time if it's a connected device. And without the promise of software updates, you can't operate the device like when the underlying OS has changed or if there's security flaws. Like it's a really necessary thing. So
Mm.
we focused mostly on that latter bit and the fact, and then the idea that the FTC has jurisdiction here because it is anti-competitive for
Right.
companies to prevent repair. So that was kind of, and I'm happy to go into any of those things if you think y'all want to talk about them.
I am curious about the anti-competitive part, because that seems to be sort of one of the crux parts for how you're motivating this and getting it pushed through.
Yeah. So the idea is if a manufacturer controls like the parts, the software diagnostics, or does something called parts pairing, no one else can come in and repair a device, which means, and I'll just use an iPhone because
Mm.
it's everybody's favorite use case. And Apple's, I'll call them very forward thinking on preventing repair or making repair a little bit difficult and aligning it with their business. So, easiest thing for people to see is like, if you can only buy, if you could only repair your iPhone at an Apple authorized repair center, right? There's there's a lack of competition, right? So in Apple, when they authorize a company, they can take fees from them. They also can get like data on the parts that are put in and where those are, and they sell those parts to the repair company.
Mm.
So that means Apple basically has this captive audience of repair professionals that they
Mm.
set pricing for, and they set like the tools and the parts they can get access to, which means if something doesn't fall into that, you can't necessarily get it repaired. Or you can get it repaired and through other mechanisms have kind of a bad experience.
Mm.
So that in itself isn't competitive. But then the other thing is Apple now has the Apple Care Plus. So they have a line of business. The New York Times estimates they earned 9 billion last year selling warranties on iPhones.
Wow.
But and that's great, except you might not have to buy that if you could go to an independent repair shop and get
Mm.
something repaired for less, right? Especially something simple like a cracked screen. Um, the other thing is because these devices are so essential to people's lives now, I mean, like, I don't know about you, but I have an extra phone just in case like my phone breaks. I also have an extra computer that we keep lying around just in case somebody else's computer breaks, right? Because it's
Mm.
going to take, you can't live without one of those, right?
Mm.
Um, and another thing Apple Care offers is expedited repairs. So
Mm.
if you can do something a little bit more quickly, you know, through them, that's another reason that they're sending the consumer to their own channel.
Right.
So that's kind of the anti-competitive nature of it.
And they do have this self-service repair system, but that also like requires you having this massive. I heard it's like 70 pounds or something. The toolkit. I could be wrong, but
It's a
and then
$1,200 deposit, or it
wow.
was, and you get it's a case, like when you go to like a trade show and you have to pack all your stuff in. It's a big
Uh-huh.
trade show case full of
Wow.
equipment. Like you have like the clamps and stuff to do the heat for the heat gun, so you can
Right.
take. It's crazy. It's yeah. That that is not like an awesome solution. Okay, so I got way sidetracked. So that's like physical access to, like, in that case, they're doing physical access to a device or to the repair tools. There are other issues. Apple has it, other companies do it too, is issues to diagnostic codes.
Mm.
So if you are John Deere does this.
Yep.
You're actually a lot of your appliance makers do this too. You'll get like an error code that's like 002B, and you're like, well, crikey, what is that? You go try to look it up, and there's nothing. You don't know, and that's because it's coming off of the firmware on the like microcontroller inside the device. Um, and so then you have to call the manufacturer to get it. They may or may not give it to you. You may or may not be able to reset it or recalibrate it after you've repaired it because you don't have access to it's basically it's embedded code that's going to flash to your microcontroller and be like, okay, we've cleared that error, or here's what it means.
Yeah.
So both
It's like
those
the
things.
McDonald's repair codes where they had these
Yeah.
secret codes on the ice cream machines. Ah.
The McFlurry.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. And so they argue people who operated the McFlurry machines were like, this is our embedded software. This is, I can't remember if they call it proprietary. I can't remember if they thought it was trademarked or not, or copyrighted. But
Mm.
yeah, that's a whole thing too. The FTC does not, the Copyright Office is going to handle that. That's not an FTC thing, but
Interesting.
yeah, there's a lot of ramifications here, but it's
So
super fun.
oh yeah. So you're saying that even if you have access to the repair tools and the parts, and there may still be these obfuscated codes. Also, you may not be able to work with the software. Also, I think you mentioned parts pairing, which, for example, Apple, you may need to like link it to your actual account in order to get it, which means that you can't just like stock a bunch of repair things or swap them out between devices easily.
Yeah, that's basically saying like you're going to tie a particular part to a particular, in this case, iPhone. But they also, in cars, they call it VIN burning, and you tie the
Oh.
VIN of an automobile or vehicle to, like, I don't know a lot about cars. I'm just gonna go a carburetor.
Oh yeah, because those keep getting stolen, like recently.
Oh,
That's a
that's a
huge thing right
catalytic
now.
converter.
Oh, yep, you're right.
I,
Brains.
it's a big deal here in Seattle.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
so so parts pairing is like, and that's kind of like the next wave. So like not a lot. There have been some wins in the right to repair space, both at the state level and then at the Copyright Office. And
Mm.
so it's becoming more common that manufacturers are being held responsible for like supplying parts to
Mhm.
people who want to repair them, which is good. But so instead, what they're now doing is tying those parts using software. So, like
Mm.
you said, so like a popular example would be like, oh, if I replace a battery in my iPhone with a battery from an old iPhone, or from the same model iPhone, but it's just like I ran over it with my car or whatever. No, that would be too damaged. Something happened to it.
Mm.
And I replaced the battery. When I put that battery in, it will flash an error message because that particular battery is not tied to that particular phone. And then you have to go in and get the authorized repair.
Mm. One sector that is mentioned in here that we don't hear talked about a lot is in terms of medical devices, where security and like the ability to control your own devices is so paramount, especially going into the future. Just like where, things that are going into your body or becoming an essential part of your body, like you need to be able to have control over those and not be able to have them like remotely hacked or shut down or whatever. I'm curious about your perspective on this because you mentioned wanting to be a genetic engineer. I'm curious about, like, you talk so much about smart homes, which in a way are an extension of our bodies. But like whether you've had any interest in like biohacking type devices or medical devices, in terms of, yeah.
I read a lot about it. So, like, I did actually do a lot with like uh, glucose monitors and people
Oh.
in the diabetic community who've
Mhm.
hacked their devices for like, uh, I cannot think of the words for them now, but a continuous like hacked together their own
Oh,
like
yeah.
continuous glucose delivery system, which I'm like, that's a step too far for me. Like, I would not do that. But so medical devices are often excluded on right to repair if we're talking solely right to repair stuff.
Mm.
And a lot of times they do say they do exclude them based on the fact that they're medical devices and they're worried about security and how they perform. There's a group called securerepairs.org that provides a lot of really awesome arguments to refute that.
Mm.
I think when you put connected devices in your body, I'm a little nervous about it because I know that there's no way something can be totally secure, right? Something is always hackable. So, like me, people are probably not going to try to attack me. But like when Dick Cheney was like, way back in the day, was like, I need my pacemaker to be like not connected to anything. That was
Yeah.
actually pretty. I know people made fun of him, but that was actually a reasonable request because
Oh,
like
absolutely.
that is not an obscure man. And if someone really wanted to hack it, it is conceivable that you could put enough resources behind it to do that. We've kind of moved from right to repair to hacking, but that's okay.
Oh,
Uh,
they're kind of tied in together, like having the ability to see what your device is doing and what its security aspects are and be able to tinker with it. But that also kind of leads into the next link that you sent me about this cyber mark. But just to wrap up this one really quick, I'd love to show people the actual recommendations that are being made in this report that you wrote. So you should make available to product owners the documentation, parts, tools, inclusive of any updates for the purposes of diagnosis, maintenance, or repair. So it's not even just repair, it's like also maintenance and diagnosis and like the ongoing stuff that makes stuff not break in the first place, which is huge when it comes to, greener electronics.
Yeah, and the diagnosis is a huge. I mean, that's kind of one of the issues for the McFlurry people, right?
Mm.
And the other thing to think about is a lot of these companies who wanna lock down their repair systems and limit where people can access repair, I was like, other than saying it's bad, which is pretty like, "Okay, Stacy," um, it's a problem not just because it's anti-competitive, but it's also a problem because these people aren't actually providing repair services. Like, that's not their core business. So,
Mm.
like, John Deere, if your business is their business is making tractors. Their business isn't keeping tractors operational, right? So they don't invest in having the infrastructure to repair tractors as they break
Mm.
because they're so far like I'm like there are limited repair people in rural areas, right? You don't have like
Mm.
and so it can take a long time to like repair a tractor. But the same thing goes for Apple. Like I live on an island outside of Seattle. So it's not like I live in the middle of nowhere, but like my closest Apple store is like an hour and a half away. So when
Mm.
things break, It'd be awesome if I could just go to like the repair center on the island and get things done. But no, I have to take a boat and then drive over to the Apple store, make an appointment. So if you're going to give these companies a monopoly on their repair stream, you should, I don't think you should, but they should actually then invest in providing repairs that are speedy and accurate. And they're not doing that because they don't
Mm.
have to, because it's not competitive. Okay.
Yeah. When it comes to the competitive aspect of it, okay, so on the one hand, we have the anti-competitive concept that we're going here with here, where like enforcing all these restrictions on repair makes it an anti-competitive act. But then also, there's in terms of being competitive and encouraging companies to do this, I was really curious about this thing that you mentioned. You have this blog post about entering your maintenance era on the IoT newsletter and stuff, and you mentioned um, that consumers may subscribe to a product over time to ensure that the company behind it continues to pay the cost to maintain it. And it's really interesting because we hear a lot of complaints about how like every hardware product is now a subscription. You have to like, we've got like bad acts like, luxury car models being like, you have to we'll build the car heater the car seat heating into your car, but in order to actually use that feature, you have to pay us monthly. And then you have like Epson where you've got or different printer manufacturers where it's like you have to subscribe on top of like to our ink specifically. But you're kind of framing a possibility where subscription could be a good thing in terms of hardware, in terms of just like encouraging them to continue to support that product. And that's really interesting to me. I'd love to hear more
Well,
about your thoughts on that.
yeah, and this is where the IoT really breaks down as a business model, and
Mm.
nobody wants to really talk about it. So let's do it. When you build a connected device, you're building a piece of physical hardware, right? But then because it's connected to the internet, you're going to have to also promise to update and maintain that, right? And in the software
Mhm.
world, we either did SaaS models or prior to that, you did licensing fees, right? Where every year you would resubscribe, you would buy your like Oracle whatever, and then you would have a license and maintenance contract for every year after that you're operating it, and that
Right.
was to pay for updates, bug fixes. On the SaaS time, it's also your cloud software or your cloud subscriptions, like the physical infrastructure. So with an IoT device or even your car, once it gets, an internet connection, you have to pay for the physical stuff and then the cloud backend behind it and those updates. And we as consumers aren't used to that. And in a lot of cases, the devices themselves didn't provide that value. Right?
Mm.
And I'll also say the companies who were building it went in with some like really ambitious ideas like, we'll harness all this data and we'll use it to make money somehow. And that didn't work out so well. So I don't think it's reasonable for a consumer to buy a device that is connected to the internet and has features that require it to be connected to the internet to expect that device to work forever without a subscription. Now, you may say, I'm going to have this work for 5 years and I'm going to build the 5 years worth of update costs into that device and sell that device for that price.
Mm.
And that's fine. But like those are the things that are in conflict.
Right. And this kind of feeds into your next the next one we were to kind of talk about, this US cyber trust mark about maintaining, sort of guaranteeing a support lifetime and maintenance. And just before we move on to that, you pointed out this really great point, which is that like the difference between a printer and a car versus an IoT device is of course that like those things don't need to be connected to the internet. Like your car seat heater does not need to be internet connected. Your like printer does not need to be internet connected except to your like local LAN so that you can like print
Right.
stuff off, right? Sorry, I hit my mic. Like, but whereas IoT devices by their nature of course are, and that maybe makes the difference between like subscription good and like subscription bad. Like it makes sense if it's actually required for the thing to function. But yeah, versus this sort of price squeezing enchitification kind of situation.
Well, I would say, if you want your car to communicate with other, like if Waze isn't enough for you and you want your car
Mm.
doing that kind of action, or if you want your car to automatically report an accident, or like if you've got a fleet management system that requires you to
Right.
know where your cars are and track all these things, then maybe you do need it to be connected. Like, I don't, again, it's just a question of value. And the companies who sell these products are terrible at articulating the value, partially because I don't think they really thought it through. And they're also, you can't trust them. Like any connected device, the world we're moving into, and this goes for AI as well, will require incredible amounts of trust. And right now, I don't know many people who are like super trusting of any corporation, really. So it requires you to like say, I trust that if I buy your connected device, you're actually going to provide this value to me over this connection and service that I'm paying for, not just hijacking my seats, which is completely unnecessary for extra revenue. And I don't think we can say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Different sort of cases, use cases, deployment cases, feature cases. So, in terms of this US cyber trust mark, this is the first time that I'd heard of this proposal, and it's so interesting. Oh yeah, let's jump in. You sound
No,
like
I'm
you have.
like, you didn't hear about it?
Oh no, I know. You know, I try to think of myself as someone who like knows what's going on, but like, dang. Well, anyone else who didn't know, don't feel bad. Now you know. There's this thing going on with the U.S. cyber trust mark. So, sort of some of the core concerns here are things like the support lifetime, like we've just been talking about, as well as knowing again what your devices are connecting to and what the kind of security measures are behind that. I'm really curious about your view on what the most important provisions of this are.
Well, so there are no provisions yet. It's really important to like level set where we're at.
Sure.
All the way back, they announced this plan for like, think of it as a nutrition label for cybersecurity. Actually, they call it the Energy Star label. Think of it as an Energy Star label for cybersecurity. And the idea is that if you buy a connected device and it has this US cyber trust mark, and I don't know if you can find a picture of it, the FCC is doing the program. If it has this mark, then it has met a certain set core baseline for cybersecurity. That's the idea. It doesn't exist yet. Oh, there it is. But
sorry.
Oh yeah, no. So like it doesn't exist yet because the FCC, when they announced the program, they're like, hey, the FCC is going to take it. And I think everybody was like a little like, what? The FCC? Okay. And they issued what they call a notice of proposed rulemaking and asked for everybody to comment. And a lot of people commented. And those comments and everything happened back in October. And now we're just waiting for the FCC to do a couple things. One is to say, hey, we now have this program, and here's the types of things a device has to, here are the standards it has to meet in order to obtain this mark. Because right now we literally have no idea. And I can talk about some of the debates if you want, but they're pretty in the weeds. And then they have to like tell somebody like the UL or ANSI or some standard setting organization, they have to say, okay, this is what we want the program to measure. Can you set up a standardization scheme and a testing scheme for this, like a conformity scheme?
Right.
And then all the manufacturers will be like, okay. And it's a voluntary program. So they can look at the FCC's baseline requirements and being like, that is way too hard. We're not going to do it. But if they do decide to do it, they're like, okay, I can do this. We're already doing this because we're amazing and we care about our consumers. Then they go in, they get the testing, and then they can get the mark. So that's where we are with the program, which is basically like, we have this idea. We don't actually know how it's going to work. Hopefully by the end of the first quarter or early second quarter, we will get those rules from the FCC. That is like what we're all hoping for. And I hope it's really good.
Yeah. So some of the things that you've proposed are that it should evaluate the product in its entirety, not only as a hardware device, so because it includes all this software stuff as well, that yeah, it should follow basic cybersecurity principles, not using a default password when it ships to you. Like, you know, there's so many things that we take for, you know, as absolutely as read in terms of personal cybersecurity that then like these devices don't even come close to approaching, which is just like
We were testing some devices just the other day in the Consumer Reports testing labs, and they were sending data unencrypted over Wi-Fi networks, like personal data. Like, I'm like, guys, are we really not doing this? It's 2024. Get with the program. So yeah, they're like the basics. And the other thing is, and we did it in our right to repair comments, and we did it here. We want that minimum, like we want some sort of date on there. I used to call it an expiration date, but now I call it a minimum guaranteed support date, which is just rolls off the tongue. But this gives manufacturers the ability to say, you know, we're going to extend support for longer, right? Manufacturers didn't want to be like, because if you make them promise to support a device, they'll do the bare minimum. But if
right.
you, and that makes sense. I mean, sort of.
Business wise, it does.
Yeah, if you sell like only 10,000 of something, you don't want to promise to support that for 5 years. Oh my
For
gosh.
sure.
You want to shut it down and give coupons to those 10,000 people because that makes more economic sense. But yeah, so when you go into a store and you buy like a connected device, you should be able to see like how long is that doorbell actually going to be supported for? And right now you can't. Like I've been doing this for 10, 12 years. I went through some of the oldest devices in my house trying to figure out if they still had security updates. So were they still secure in my house? I have like 80 devices in my home, or I had. This was as I was rationalizing after I shut down the blog. I think I could only find information on like 8 of them, like online. And then the rest I had to email these companies. Some of them never got back to me. So that should not be how that works because that's just insane for a consumer. That's like driving a car that's been recalled and you don't know it, right?
Yeah, and I am actually curious about you. So you have this changing view on IoT devices. You have spent so much time focusing on smart homes. You clearly have a very complex setup at your own house, and of course, like Matter may end up helping with that. But I'm curious, like, what devices are you holding on to, like, and what ones are you looking to transition out? Maybe just like the first part there, like, which ones would you choose to like keep around? Or I assume this is sort of an evolving question for you.
Yeah, no, I'll name and shame. I mean, so I got rid of almost all. I still keep one unplugged in the corner of my. I call it Madam A, so I don't set off anyone's Amazon Echoes. But my Amazon Echo devices, they're all gone. And that was just because they became too annoying to use. Like they were just constantly like, by the way, let me tell you about something you could. I'm like, I just want to know the weather. So that my husband was like, oh. I also got rid of some devices that I got rid of, like I had an Aware air quality monitor thing. I got rid of that because it wasn't being supported anymore. It's hard for me I got rid of this Aquara sensor that it never worked right for me. And I had such high hopes. It was the FP2. It was one of the first not ultrasonic, ultra wideband sensors using 60 gigahertz radar to like track multiple things in the house. It doesn't work.
No.
I mean, it half works, but it was just so annoying. I don't have to deal with it. I did keep my Lutron devices, although I did have to email them. And I was like, hey, do you still, I mean, I've had this thing forever. Do you still support the cassette bridge? They're like, yeah, totally. I'm like, could you put it on your website? So that's still supported. And I love those. And if you're going connected lights, Lutron. I kept my June oven, which is a connected oven that uses AI to see what food's in there and then has a programmed recipe that it just cooks it for you. But it was bought by Weber a while back, and I think everything's sold out. So I don't think we're going to see more of those. Like if you go to Get June, I don't think you can buy a June anymore. And I'm just waiting for the day it breaks and I I can't buy a June
Oh yeah.
anymore. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Um, which is a real shame. I freaking love that device.
Oh, yeah. Plus, there's all this stuff going on with, gas, uh, powered stoves and stuff in homes now, and there I think is more of a push toward electric and induction, stovetops, and this one is, very much electric, it looks like. Super cool. It's
Yeah,
too
it's like
bad.
it's a toaster oven. I have the connected GE oven, and actually I bought some pans that connected, smart pans that connected with the oven. They
Ah!
didn't work, so that they're gone. Um, it was so promising. Like again, it was one of those like IoT things where you're like, oh, if only this worked well. Where the pan would measure from the induction. The pan and the oven or the stove communicated about the temperature of the pan and the temperature setting on the stove back to the cloud where you had a recipe. So you could like throw your onions in there to caramelize and it would keep it at an even like temperature.
What?
I know. You're like, that sounds freaking magical.
Yeah.
The execution was terrible.
Oh,
Oh my
no.
God. Like the Bluetooth, like it would work on my phone, but my husband couldn't have access to the app, so he had to steal my phone if he wanted to cook, and then like
Oh.
the pan would lose connect. It was like just a
You know, I love the Glowforge laser desktop laser cutter, but that is a thing where it has to be like hooked up to someone's specific account, and you have to like either give them access to your account specifically, or whatever. And it's like it's a laser cutter, it doesn't need that. So
yeah.
you mentioned 3 different things that are kind of like breaking cases for you, like where it doesn't work well enough and it isn't supported anymore and it's just annoying. I'm curious how you feel about personalities and devices in general. Like, do you want your smart home to have a personality? That feels like something that's so personal where like, I build these like little robots. I've got to mention that. Like, but oh, I can't even see them. Well, anyway, so the idea though is that like I'm building something with a personality that I tailor, and therefore it won't be annoying to me personally. But when you have a company that's designing personalities for these things, it seems like there's such a dangerous ground of like just making it annoying to people or whatever, and there's a lot of danger zones.
Well, homes have like many homes, not all homes have multiple people living in them. So like
Yeah.
my home robot would be super quirky. Like my Roomba is named Terrence, and he is a British butler. Like
Ah!
you will not convince me otherwise. Now, my husband, when he's like telling Google to tell Terrence to vacuum things, he's like, you can just sense his eye roll, right? He would have like, I don't know, he would have like a Spock like interface. I mean, just so rational. So, like, I think the idea of personality in these devices and the promise, like some of the promise of AI and developing those personalities and tailoring them to people, you just have to remember it's a shared space. And I think a lot of the tech firms never even got that, which makes a lot of the stuff I mean, that's why my oven pan thing was so hard to use. They were like, "What? You're gonna share this? And
Mm.
you're gonna share it with children?" And children have horrible taste. As anyone who, like, has children
Oh
and is like, puts in a
no.
smart speaker, they're like, "Baby shark, fart noises. Why?" So I think there's room for personality, but I think it's probably your personal assistant that you access and not like I think your home's assistant should be a little bit, maybe less personality if you live with people.
Yeah, it seems like a glamorous to have like an actual like humanoid type thing, but in actual reality, like humanoids are often like the least efficient thing for what they're actually trying to do if it's a single purpose robot. But then also like it's like having another roommate that you like just
Yeah.
decided to put in there, and if the personalities don't gel, then that's not going to work.
Well, they're just like, I don't, have you ever visited like Tokyo? I mean, sure. But Toyota they've got their robots. And have you seen their robot gantry system for homes?
I have
It
not.
is
What?
so one of the to solve the problem of the extra roommate, and part of this was like Toyotas in Japan, they have smaller homes. They were like, you don't want this like big old bulky robot hanging around. You want it on your ceiling on a gantry system, like coming down with its little arms, like helping you out. Which, yeah, I'm
That's not
like,
dystopian
no,
at all.
that's not freaky. I mean,
Whoa, look at its little arms.
so
Wow.
it like I actually think there's some really cool things about bringing more humanoid or more generic robots into systems, and maybe they're not totally humanoid. Uh, like I once wrote an entire article about like if we design for robots in public spaces, we're actually designing for disability because robots have a
Yeah.
hard time climbing stairs. So you want to put in
Ooh.
ramps, and they can't turn doorknobs because they don't have that dexterity, just like people with arthritis who do better with like lever knobs. Like there's a lot of really cool things there, but I totally sidetracked that. Sorry.
No, legit. And it kind of reminds me of this situation, like how personal it is. Reminds me of this amazing talk I saw. Cory Doctorow talk like maybe probably 12 years ago at this point, and was talking about how like your car is a biohacking device, or like a personal, like a wearable device, because you're putting your body into it as well as things that you put on your body. Like wearable devices are also the things that you put your body into, and in this case your entire home is kind of like an extension of yourself, so of course it's like very personal and like yeah.
Yeah.
let's dig let's dig into your third article that we've got linked in the description below. Hint hint. How bad business broke the smart home. And this is kind of very much a continuation in some of the same themes, but you mention your struggles with some of the smart home devices that you've been working with, and like specific like ways that they can break and stuff. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your thoughts that you're going through in this article.
Yeah, in that it ties back like the solutions to some of the problems of that article are things like right to repair and the support updates that we already talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another element that I don't think consumers are aware of when they buy, or they might be aware of it, but you don't feel it viscerally. It hasn't happened to you necessarily yet. When you buy a connected device, a lot of times people are buying it to work within an ecosystem. So I might buy a Ring doorbell to work with my Amazon ecosystem, which that one's going to work. They're owned by the same company. But like I bought a MyQ garage door opener. And at the time I bought it, it worked with lots of systems. It worked with IFT. It worked with, I don't remember. I bought my MyQ when there was like the Quirky and the Wink systems were out there, and it worked with those. So it worked with lots of things. And over time, all of those integrations broke, and they broke because the business contracts between Chamberlain, which owned the MyQ, and IFT, they didn't want to pay them anymore. So they were like, nah, we're going to stop. But for a user, I have no say in that process. I have no transparency into that process. So one day I get an email that is like, hey, next week all your stuff's going to break. And you're like, suck. But you don't have recourse. And what if you only bought that one because it worked with this system, which is something that people commonly do? And just the idea here is we're putting a lot of, when we buy something that's hardware, something physical, we think it's going to break, like hardware breaks, like your screen breaks or an LED chip burns out, whatever. But it doesn't. A lot of times it's going to break because they stop providing support, or maybe a contract between two companies fails. And we don't have any protections around that as consumers. And that's really frustrating. And it's also why I stopped wanting to tell people to buy this stuff.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You invest X amount of money into it, and then that's just trash now. That's happened with some bikes and stuff. Of course, there are some groups that are kind of working against this. For example, there's an option where you can open source it, like Pinocchio did. That's not a solution for most consumers who aren't going to be able to just like dig into the hardware and like adapt to their thing. But like one option for people who are doing that. And then of course the Rebel group, who Pebble worked specifically with them, the Pebble smartwatches, to develop this alternative firmware so that you could when they shut down their servers, they would still have life, which is awesome. So yeah, all these different options for like how to get these to keep working. I'm curious about your thoughts on Matter. I know that you gave a talk about this recently, but there's this possibility that it could just be another. It does tie together many different standards. So Google stuff, Apple stuff works with it. Thread, Zigbee, all these different protocols work with Matter. So maybe it's a little more immune to that, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on Matter as a solution to this.
I just realized in that photo of me, I'm wearing a Pebble. Sorry. I was like, oh, that's a Pebble watch right there. Yay. That's a really old photo, by the way.
Yeah, legit.
So Matter, when it came out, I was so excited because, yeah, Samsung, Apple, Google, Amazon, everyone was like, yeah, we're going to get all our devices to work together because it was such a pain. Um, and then what happened is, well, the pandemic kind of slowed it down, and then it slowed down further. And what happened is, Matter as it stands today is promising. It's promising because there's security elements in there. It's promising because they do want all the devices to come and work together, but it's at a very limited capacity. So, like, if it's a light bulb, the light bulb will turn on and off and dim and do color, but it's not going to do like circadian rhythms if you want that, right? So, if you want that,
Mm.
you got to go into an ecosystem, which is fine. Like, they're struggling to draw the line on like how far you want these things to go. Consumers want everything to be freaking easy. Like, they
Oh
want it to
yeah.
be like links easy, right? This is like, I envision the smart home as having like kind of like links. You just click it and you go someplace. With the smart home, a device comes in, it tells you its capabilities, and like another computer in your home uses those capabilities. But that's not how the smart home works. A device comes into your home with Matter, it'll tell your computer it can do these things, and that computer will handle it. But those things are pretty basic. It's not going to do anything that like you really would buy a connected device for, right? It's not going to do the
Mm.
automated stuff that you're hoping for, because that's where these companies perceive the money is and the subscription revenue. So Matter's going to help with the basics, but I
Mhm.
don't think it's going to be as awesome as I really wanted it to be, and I'm very sad about it. It also doesn't cover a lot of devices yet.
Oh yeah. I've seen some demos of it with, as we mentioned, the Apple and Google devices and stuff. But once you get beyond that, there is like such a huge lens. You mentioned having 80 devices in your home. Is that before or after this sort of purge, or is it an ongoing?
Now I only have like 45.
Legit. Wow. So Pat Dooley chimes in. I'm gonna switch to this so we're not cutting you off here. There's something similar with Cricket. They were going to change the terms of service. They wanted to start charging for use of design space and would break your device if you transferred ownership. Oh no. Well, a lot of this stuff seems to kind of like get backtracked once people rebel against it. There's
Well, Cricket actually backtracked against existing owners, but then new people buying into the system bought into that system. And I don't think they made it super clear. But yeah, those are the kind of things like you do get this like bifurcated ownership system where like these older people, but when that device breaks, you're done.
yeah. So like
And
Venmo, we heard about recently. Oh, go on, please.
yeah, well, you mentioned Pebble, and like I don't know if you had the Anki robots. Did you ever have those? They were so
Oh,
cute.
I
Yeah,
am aware of
right.
those. Yeah.
Yeah, so they actually sold a bunch of their robots. I had one. They were awesome. And then a company came in actually and did a crowdfunded thing to like support the servers and all that. Because again, it costs money for this stuff,
Mm.
right? Um, but they couldn't really build a real business around it. And again, you have to have a real business to keep something like that operational. So I feel like a lot of people are like, just put the code in escrow, and if the devices dies, people maintain it. But that's not actually true. Um, and that's really, it's hard both for people who are like your audience who can hack things together and do stuff and very smart,
Mhm.
and it sucks for the end consumer who maybe can't do those things. But it's not enough to just be like, oh, I can just totally open source this and have it operate. That might work for a year or two for the most technically adept people, but it's not going to keep something operational for very long.
Yeah. So, in interest of respecting your time here, I know you've
Yeah.
got a stop in a few minutes, but I wanted to just mention a couple of things that you made me aware of. I didn't know that it's Consumer Reports, where you're doing a lot of amazing journalism these days, uh, has a couple of utilities that people can use to keep their data secure. So there's this security planner, and
Yeah,
also,
this is, if you go in, like, this is for any normal person. This is for, we actually have plans for like journalists or
oh,
activists. Those plans are a little bit more intense, but you basically pick like the devices you have, and then you get this massive like list of things you could do. You probably should not do them all at once because it would take forever. And
okay,
some of
yeah.
them are some of them are things like really simple
Oh,
stuff like, hey, have you enabled MFA? And some of them are a little bit more complicated. So go through that. I mean, the savvier you are, you probably have most of this done, but it is also a nice tool to like link to like your parents or grandparents who could also benefit from this. And then our other is an app called Permission Slip, and we launched that as a data deletion project. So basically, you go in and you can download this app for free, and you have to give us your information because we have to, on behalf of you, we will go to companies who are governed by the California Consumer Privacy Act and ask them to delete your data for you. And it's pretty awesome. Like, it's a really great tool. I've used it to get rid of it. And it does a good job of explaining some things like All Trails has my data, but I actually want All Trails to have my data because I need to keep track of the trails I've run. So that's
All
okay.
Trails is awesome.
I have a love-hate relationship with it. I'm like, this is not a moderate hike. Why am I on a mountaintop?
Oh no.
But anyway, and both of these tools are completely free. They're part of the work that we do out of our innovation lab. And I mean, try it out. Our goal is to like make, and in some cases, the data we use, like if your data doesn't get deleted, that's useful for us to know, because then we can go back to the California Attorney General and be like, hey, this company didn't actually delete anybody's data, and here's the proof. So
nice. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. Let me just go back through our links really quick so that everyone knows what you should look for in the description to the video. We're going to be updating this with some more of the links that we talked about today. So we've got Stacy on LinkedIn. We've got Stacy on IoT.com. If you want to go back through the archives, lots of cool stuff there, and also more info, like more about your sort of interesting transition here. Blue Sky, Twitter/X, whatever you want to call it. The security planner we were talking about, permission slip. And then also there's these articles that are already down in there. I wanted to quickly mention the iFixit repairability score for those who are interested in this. It kind of lists out different types of, oh, you talked about the French repairability index. There's a bunch of stuff like that. Securerepairs.org. And just all these other articles we will have linked in the description to the video. Thank you so much for joining us, Stacey Higginbotham. This has been a delight, and I know that there's. I was so like starstruck and kind of nervous to meet you, and I would love to have you on another time. I feel like there's so much more we could dive into. People were talking in the comments about AI. We didn't even touch on that. There's all this new stuff with like the Flipper Zero and Canada banning them for car thefts and like how that interacts with. Okay, but thank you again for joining us.
All of that is cool.
I know, right?
And thank you for having me. I have I went up to you and introduced myself to you because I was like, oh my God, Alex Glow, she's so cool.
At Tiny ML Summit last year, I was like,
yeah. So
anyway,
thank you.
Oh, what a joy. Thank you everyone for joining us and for sharing your comments and questions. We'll see you next week, and hack on.